Right, new up-and-coming band and restriction announcement. So, these changes don't come into effect until July 6th, so any major tournaments on for this weekend, these will not be in effect for. Now, we'll do this three ways, right? We'll do a nice quick overview of what's to come and go for Classic Constructed and Silver Age. Then we've got quite a bit to talk about when it comes to the article itself, so we'll poke around through that, and then we'll go into the cards a little bit greater detail. So, to start, for Classic Constructed, the unbans are Electromagnetic Somersault in blue, Skyward Serenade, and Talk a Big Game, while Remembrance is being banned. Now, for Silver Age, we have Cash In, Seeds of Agony, Stillblade Shunt, and Vigorous Smash Up, all being unbanned, which is quite the hefty amount of changes for both formats. Now, it's a bit lightning-centric when it comes to Classic Constructed. Electromagnetic Somersault in blue particularly is there to aid for Ziggy. Skyward Serenade, well, it's to give a little extra oomph to Aurora because she's fallen a little flat of expectations. And then Talk a Big Game is definitely an interesting one because I guess they were sort of worried about something that maybe did not exist too readily, right? When it came to Super Slam and those heroes, and the initial reason why Talk a Big Game was banned, I guess you could say they talked a big game about it. And then Remembrance is a curiosity, but a much needed change, right? A card that I really like to see go. It's one of those big overarching effects that would normally be dealt with in a different game if there was the standard sense of rotation, right? Because it's a card that's been around for, well, the inception, seeing as it was printed in Welcome to Rathe, and it's a generic. So to take that out of the card pool and then maybe print more specific hero/class versions of the card is definitely a good design element. And then again, for Silver Age, Cash In is just, it's a great card to open up in Silver Age, right? Gold, silver, copper, they all have such a different place within Silver Age than they do in Classic Constructed. That Cash In can flourish and not be, broken, right? Seeds of Agony for, well, Chain, maybe a little for Vincent. Steelblade Shunt brings a decent amount of defensive options back to Warrior, puts Decimator probably back on the table, right? And then Vigorous Smash Up with KO benched for now is definitely a really nice change for Brute, just helping aid their curve a little bit more. Alright, let's dive into the article. So again, here's the cards that are unbanned, Class Constructed, banned, and then of course for Silver Age down the bottom. But the main meat of what we want to discuss starting off is the actual thoughts put into the article itself. So there's some interesting rationales here and explanations for how they handle things. So we are, well, I should say I am, going to read this in its entirety, but I will chop out the parts that aren't really that necessary, right? So that we can keep this in a nice, timely manner. So, we come to the table before Pro Tour Las Vegas with a mix of bans and unbans, intended to add some new wrinkles to what already looks to be a very well-balanced Classic Constructed format. Balance, however, is not in and of itself enough to make a format great. Formats also have to feel exciting, satisfying to play, appropriately skill-intensive, and often need to have something new to offer in comparison to previous iterations, right? They want something that is ever-changing, but also not restricted, right, to the normal format of rotating sets in and out. So it's an arduous ask, and it's obviously been met with a lot of trial and tribulation, but nonetheless, I do think LSS continue to adapt and change, and although, personally, I might disagree with certain choices and elements here or there, the fact that, again, they can speak their mind and share thoughts, good and bad, is always welcomed. It is the last point where we feel the current metagame could find some improvement. An interesting consequence of great format balance that has been the relatively flat dispersion of Living Legend points over the past few seasons. The pace of Living Legend ascension has tracked at the low end of our internal modeling, which has had consequences both for internal expectations around hero success, as well as the pace of format evolution via heroes remaining legal longer than expected. Therefore, it falls on us to act and create some change. So that is already, great insight, right? There's always been the speculation, the thought of how does LSS plan and handle set development around the whole concept of Living Legend, right? When, we saw Volzar getting banned, the straightaway thought for a lot of people was, well, they obviously expect Oscilio to have LL'd by the time OMEN'S comes out. Now, interestingly, that wasn't the case. But nonetheless, that's what it felt like, and that's obviously how LSS is trying to shape things. So again, that need for continuous adaptability is how the Living Legend system can remain impactful, right? Obviously, there are stuff that do fall flat and don't quite pan out in the way that, the community may hope, LSS may hope, you personally may hope. But nonetheless, as long as, again, the whole backbone of it is to always be ready to make changes, that is great, right? That is what will be great to me for the longevity of Fab, right? In order to explain our two lightning-focused unbans, it's worth talking about the goal that was set internally around Omens of the Third Age regarding each of the 4 heroes in the set. However, several of those goals could not be adjusted in retrospect, and where we went astray on achieving some of those goals, yeah, we'll gloss past the little joke, right? So they mean by that Oscilio, right? Aurora's gone already. New Aurora, new Oscilio, and Zyggy. Often sets are designed and developed not only with a focus on their new heroes, but also with a very hard focus on updating an existing member of the cast. In the case of Omens of the Third Age, we came in with the expectation that the original Oscilio Constilla Intelligence would be the primary lightning wizard benefiting from the expanded card pool, right? So again, the concept was not to have Oscilio leave and have its replacement ready, but to give Oscilio more tools and then just have the new Oscilio, right, work in the mix of limited more so than anything. So the question is, why print Oscilio Forked Continuum at all? Well, that's a question that LSS did debate. What if Omens of the Third Age only included the new Lightning Flow dependent Oscilio to support limited play, i.e. just the young variant, right? The absence of a new class constructed Oscilio would make it plainly clear what they intended to do, right? What the bans were intended for, what the whole card pool was meant to achieve. Which is kind of curiosity, right? Because there's that emphasis on Starfall, which definitely does work in the case of both Oscilios. But then you have, the ponder interactions and certain other elements that, to me, do sort of give them an achievable difference to one another, right? If that makes sense. There is value to playing either of them. I may be wrong. Again, I haven't played Wizard all that much, and, old Oscilio might just smoke buff Oscilio. But anyway, to me, it does seem like they are divergent, and that's interesting enough to, develop both further, rather than, again, just trying to put spotlight on old Oscilio. But it does bring up an interesting concept, which is the way in which they handle this element of introducing or priming a new variant of a hero that is close to LLing, but hasn't quite left just yet. And, it would completely wreck set development. But I do sort of like that idea of you introduce the Sage variant, right? You get people speculating, playing with at least the new mechanics, and then you roll out the class constructed variants. Again, that's not really achievable from a set design perspective currently. They'd have to retool things immensely, but that could really be workable to me, right? So if you took all of the heroes that were top, of the board, and you just slowly spit out chapter decks, Sage decks, small iterations to, again, get players acclimatized, right? Before you then roll out the new set as a prime feature of a set, or, maybe here's the hero in the expansion slot, it's a token, basic, right? Easily pullable, but, with a few cards dedicated in the expansion slot for their new release. Because we are getting to the point where this whole concept of your cards always being applicable to whichever variant of the hero is current, right, means that they don't want to deviate too far, right? Oscilio wants lightning instant wizard cards. That's what both Oscilios will be built around, even if they approach it slightly different. So in that sense, we don't need a whole heap of cards, right? And it's sort of where Omens feels a little off, because Aurora didn't need a whole heap of cards. The way they're talking about Oscilio, right? He needed slight retooling, but not a whole heap of cards. Zyggy, we'll get to that, right, is their concept of half-released, half-baked heroes, which I don't like. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, how would you feel if that was sort of the rationale to release the primers for the next variant of any given hero, right? To Sage, play with them, understand them, learn from them, speculate on them, and then filter them out into the sets themselves as, again, big pieces, because they don't have any influence on Limited itself, right? Obviously, Limited, as fun as it is, doesn't sell boxes, right? The main hunt is the cards that are going to aid in competitive play, but nonetheless, it is something to consider, think about, right? So yeah, let me know what you think. What are your thoughts around the system as it is current, right? But anyway, so in hindsight, this seems like it would have been the correct call. The existence of Oscilio Forked Continuum has created a gap between the expectations of a large contingent of the community, right? So this idea that we judge the successfulness of any given product by the heroes and how well they succeed out of the gates, right? So Misval regarded as great or broken, right? Because all the heroes were wildly successful. Something like OMEN'S falls a little flat. Granted, Ziggy's found new life outside of his intended pathway, potentially, right? And then Aurora, right? Maybe they were a bit too hard on the bans going into OMEN'S. And again, this concept with new Oscilio not being meant to necessarily be played, right? So, yeah, obviously there's a huge amount of variables that could be used to grade any given set, and you all have your own opinions. I have my own opinions, right, around which sets I think are successful, which are not, right? So, yeah, it is obviously a hard thing to balance. So, I do like this element of their good intentions, which were to provide a continuum of the Lightning Wizard card pool once the original Oscilio did attain Living Legend. So they still do expect him to go somewhat soon, and this will be the first real hero where we have the replacement fully primed, right, before he actually goes, where it is, in a sense, again, although I do view them as divergent, still one-to-one of one another, and the elements that comprise what they're trying to do. For instance, obviously think someone like Briar being compared to it then being split into Florian and Aurora, right? So overall, they've heard loudly that we want a shorter wait time, or no wait time at all, right, for a new version of X hero to come out once the other hero does rotate. So I think what was their expectation of a hero's life was 18 months. That might be a little old, right? It's in one of their much earlier dev talks at this point, but that was a great insight in towards their development. It's probably changed at some point, but you have that cycle of, again, how long a hero should last, and then they start developing its replacement, whereas a lot of people want them to predict, plan, and deliver on a replacement within a set or within a year, probably less than that, within less than a year. Think about all the heroes that are waiting, Icelander, Dromai, right, that people really want straight away. They're coming, but, being very delayed. So, yeah, they've heard loudly that no wait time at all is desired, so they are going to make more of an effort to deliver on that. But, like with anything in life, there is trade-offs. Now, for Aurora, the story is quite different, as she squarely sits as a victim of external metagames taking a different path from internal metagames. So this is probably the other big element that I do want to talk about. I don't think there was... Oh, well, no, we do want to touch on Ziggy, right? And that's that concept of where a hero should start out of the gate, right? So, yeah, the main thing here, we won't read the whole thing, is that the benchmark for what they expected fell ridiculously short. Well, I should say ridiculously. Fell much lower, right, in actuality. So that was sort of the problem. They highly expected Aurora to be, well, like old Aurora, which is a weird element because they themselves kept citing that old Aurora wasn't powerful, wasn't broken, was mainly because of the mass community adoption. So, yeah, kind of weird that their expectation was that she was going to, still dominate the aggro race. Interestingly enough, she didn't test against Goldmane, Syndra, or Phi, because they were all forecasted to reach Living Legend. All three of them. Yeah. Curiosity there. I guess it was meant to be dominoes, right? Victor was meant to go a lot sooner, and then that opens up the pathway for aggro, and then with Syndra and Phi both gone, Aurora takes her place as best aggro girl, right? So, overall, again, it goes back to you can't get everything right, but you should strive to get as close as possible. So, the whole idea around their internal Living Legend modeling doesn't quite, get conveyed here in the full essence, but they do, constantly take data, right, from competitive play and try to extrapolate from that where things will go, how things will pan out in the subsequent future to plan set design, hero replacements, heroes being released, and overall, what's needed, right? Do they need an aggro hero? Do they need a new fatigue hero, etc.? So that is really cool to see, but I am... I have to be a little bit mean, right? This continued acknowledgement that their testing has not worked once more is, a bit of an issue, right? So there's been multiple cases where they have, outright said, what we tested for wasn't quite correct, and therefore it led to XYZ problem. So, again, rope certain people in. There's a whole streamline of competitive players that probably would love testing. Obviously, it gets a hard thing to manage, leaks and whatnot, but nonetheless, if your internal testing is not panning out this late into development, right? Almost to the 20th set, it's probably time to work most on that. Because again, the main crux of the Living Legend system is, in order to manage it, in order to release things correctly for it, it does require that level of testing, that effort to make sure everything is cohesive, right? So on the one hand, awesome that the community defied expectation, that we find interesting new ways or new approaches to certain heroes and play patterns, and that's all fascinating to see. But it should be, a game of tug of war, right? Where LSS gets a step ahead of us in terms of planning, predicting, and testing form, and then we steal things back and back and forth, back and forth. That would be my dream state of testing and deliverance within managing the Living Legend system of Flesh and Blood. Now, lastly, for Zyggy. So, we'll emphasize this one, right? The idea of building a hero over time is one that LSS is fond of. Releasing all of our heroes immediately into the top of the metagame can make every set feel like a complete reset, and ignores our dedicated players who appreciate going on that journey of growth as part of a long-term relationship with their hero. However, it is fair to say that we've probably slid the dial a bit too far to the build over time side of things in recent sets. Adjustments can never be immediate, but you can rest assured that we are taking on this feedback. So great to hear, right? Because obviously, holla, felt like, DLC to come, so we'll get Master Pack Warrior. Hopefully that fleshes it out fully, but especially as a Armory deck Origins, I mean, Jarl sort of suffered the same fate. Yeah, there's an expectation of a little bit more of what that hero should be out of the gates. Now, for a set itself, it's one thing to obviously release a hero that just tops the charts. It's another thing to release a hero that fits squarely into the current meta, and then obviously to release a hero that, again, falls short. Oscilio more so than Zyggy in OMEN'S, right? But again, that was kind of intended. Just speaks to, again, that balancing act. So, again, appreciative that they are taking feedback and that they are going to try and work on where things need to correctly start. I, for one, hate the concept of here's, the workings of a hero. Again, going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, I'd love if, Silver Age was that testing ground, right? And you'd release a bit more of a fully fledged hero because, again, it's within the power space of rares and commons, and then you give them the correct majestics along with their adult variants to then fit nice and neatly into class constructed. Now, on the one hand, I understand the whole idea that, people who have a meta competitive deck, suddenly, something has to give. Some deck has to drop away if a new hero slots in, right? Then getting upset about the price investment or the time investment to learn that deck. But I would also argue that releasing a hero that does then compete with the current meta is the best way to keep the current meta fresh, right? Every set should feel like a new meta. It should be shaken up, not by bans or restrictions or changes by that nature, but by the toolkit pieces of the expansion slot and the new heroes to come, right? There should be that desire to play new heroes. The lifeblood of Flesh and Blood is its competitive nature. So in order for a set to be successful, and, speaking on the concept of what makes a set successful, to me, it's whether or not a hero does not take over the meta, but fit into the current meta. And Zyggy does, right? Not necessarily through the tools he was intended to have, but nonetheless, he is obviously competitive, and he has won, right? But that's the benchmark for a successful set for me, right? Anyway, it is a great read, so I do recommend reading the whole thing, especially about Remembrance. Again, the whole concept that it's a long existing card that has served as a backbone around card pools, right, within Flesh and Blood, so it is probably time for it to go. But nonetheless, it's always great to get a full write-up and some insight into the mentality behind LSS, right? Again, it shows a lot of effort that they do want to instill in the game, so fantastic to see, but nonetheless, we'll move on to the cards, but yeah, let me know. What do you think, right, about LSS's mentality towards handling their formats and bans and restrictions and, well, hero development, right? But onto the cards. Now, getting back to the cards, we have Electromagnetic Somersault being unbanned in blue for Classic Constructed. Now, the rationale behind this, compared to, say, yellow and red, is its cost element, right? Not the cost of the card, but the cost of what it can target. So they all have choose up to 2 attack action cards with cost X, right? So for blue, it's 2 or more, yellow, 1 or more, and red would be 0 or more. So the whole idea here behind specifically targeting blue is that it limits its options, right? It's designed around aiding the defensiveness of bigger decks, i.e. Ziggy and some of those big illusionist attacks, right? Allowing you to block with a couple and then use electromagnetic somersault to get back that value. If they opened up red, well, Aurora would definitely take advantage of that. And then yellow sort of falls in the middle ground because there are definitely some nice one costs that Aurora does have access to, and maybe Oscilio in a little bit of the mix there, right? But as it stands, the main idea behind blue is to give Ziggy a little bit extra of a lifeline. Again, give him a bit more of a defensive viability where he can block out, get stuff back, and then still have a functional aggressive turn with a nice big illusionist attack. Now, the other lightning change is, of course, Skyward Serenade coming back, right? No Rathe in sight. So this card was essentially a misprint in the way it functions, but nonetheless, it's the version we got, and it's the version we're going to keep. So you get to choose to create an embodiment of lightning token, search your deck for a Skazak, bash it, and then shuffle. You may play this turn, and your next attack this turn gets +1. So it's really, really flexible and essentially amounts with Skazak to at least another 0-4 on demand. So it is definitely a really nice aggro filler piece for Aurora. And again, if you have those other synergies, if you don't need to go again, you can take the +1, and it just adds to its overall value. So it is definitely a strong card to see back. It's maybe not as egregious as it once was, right, with other cards not in purview, i.e. Channel Lightning Valley. You can still arc ping, but you can't back it up with, say, Flicker Wisp. So it is a go again piece. It is a 0-4 aggressive piece, and overall, it is just a nice toolkit piece for Aurora to do what she wants, and that is dump her hand. Now, in terms of talk a big game, we actually did explore this a little bit, trying to figure out what exactly was egregious about it, right? And I kind of just chalked it up to being a win more card, right? That is basically what it is. It does obviously benefit from a lot of the elements of Super Slam, right? Confidence is probably a big one, not to mention you then also have Overpower and Dominate, so you do have ways to force damage through and allow this card to snowball. But think about it, right? Even as a blue for Guardian or Brute, you choose a number the next time you deal that much or more damage to a hero this turn, you get to make that many might tokens. Now, there are ways to get more might out of it than, again, just face value, but overall it is a do-nothing card till your next turn that also relies on getting said damage through. So if you're greedy, right, and you pick too large of a number, it is a little bit easier for your opponent to shut it down. So it is definitely, to me, a card that enables snowballing more so than anything, but it's not going to dig you out of a hole. Even again, when you do combine it with effects like Confidence, Overpower, or Dominate. That is not to say it is not going to be a fun card, it's not going to be a functional card, but it is not as scary, right, as I think LSS initially made it out to be, at least in my opinion. Now, obviously, there is some fun stuff to be done. Victor's probably going this week, but if he doesn't, obviously with his big payoff with the might he can generate through Visit, and then Overpower and Golden Sun, you can use this to snowball out the end of the game once you have hit your second cycle and you've got things stacked nice and neatly. Otherwise, with Pleiades and Confidence or Lyeth, right, just building a nice big attack where you are going to definitely get damage through. As long as you can make the correct educated guess, you can benefit from it. Now, as a blue, right, functionally, you don't really need too much value out of it, right? 2 might is probably on rate, technically, as, you know, a turn delayed effect, but if you can get 3, 4, you're probably really happy about it. Does then lead into other effects that, you know, check auras or check pluses, so it does have some nice synergy. Now, in particular, I'm going to enjoy using this in Betsy with her nice big log. I can think of nothing better to, again, try and snowball, right? You take a pile driver, and then you just stack it up nice and big with her wager effects and Overpower, and then you just snowball from there. Now, the other curiosity is Reiner. Does this aid Reiner in enough sense to help speed up his rotation out of Classic Constructed? I can't say it necessarily does, right? It's been around since Heavy Hitters. It was probably experimented with, but again, it's that whole slow element. You could comfortably probably just get 3 might out of it consistently through Intimidate, through Dominate, through some of the other brute effects, and is a blue, so you can either start by playing it or start by pitching it, so it doesn't wreck your hand too much or your deck. but in all honesty, you just still have better miss options, right, to take in your deck than talk a big game. So, fun card. I'm definitely going to play around with it, but, potentially not as scary as LSS initially thought. Now, in terms of the ban, 4 class constructed, Remembrance is gone. So Remembrance has been around since Welcome to Rathe and is a much needed toolkit piece for both fatigue decks and decks going against fatigue decks. So the ability to return 3 cards from your graveyard to your deck at the cost of 1 card is obviously fairly strong, right? If your opponent's plan is to deck you out and swing you down, getting cards back is a lifeline. So while it is in a sense, necessary effect, right? It's sort of an effect that has been ingrained in the game since its inception, and I am actually really happy to see it go. We do have cards in a similar vein, right? We got Ominous Excavation in OMEN'S itself, which is essentially a lesser Remembrance, maybe with some upside, but it can only target instant cards. You also then have more class-specific stuff, like Quiver of Abyssal Depths or Dig Up Dinner, and that's sort of the area I'd like to see shine a little bit more, right? Getting rid of some of these overarching generics that, again, when they were initially designed, were the fallback because, well, the card pools were not as big as they are now, and then starting to actually fill out specific heroes and classes with key pieces that fit whatever they are trying to do or whatever they're trying to combat, right? That's the whole point of the expansion slot. So I think it could have stayed. I think it could have gone a while ago, but nonetheless, it's time, right? It's time to get rid of, again, something that has underpinned a whole heap of decks throughout the lifespan of Flesh and Blood. Now, on to Silver Age. We have Cash In being unbanned. So again, the whole concept of gold, silver, and copper works significantly better as an objective, right? And having an reward for that objective is great within a Silver Age, right? It's not an easy feat to get gold or have gold easily accessible, especially in the heroes that want gold and want to use gold for other things, to have it as a payoff specifically for Cash In. Now, silver, right? Assassin's got its trick, but now they also have other payoff pieces for it. So I think Cash In is just a really, really nice card to see returned to Silver Age because, yeah, in Class Constructed, it was broken, right? There's tons of ways to cheat resources, there's tons of ways to get the silver and gold without having to go through any difficulty at all. Warrior with copper as well. So it was a really strong draw engine within Class Constructed. But in the vein of Silver Age, I think it is just a great payoff for an actual proper game objective within the hero class that you're taking it in. Now, Seeds of Agony, unbanned in all 3 color schemes. So you may play Seeds of Agony from your banish zone, check as shadow, and then your next attack with, depending on the variant of card, so red 2 or less, yellow 1 or less, and blue 0 or less. This turn gets, when this attacks, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero, which is definitely a nice way to add on a ping and get a free card that you can play, right? If it's hit through Soul Shackle, or if it is the card you get rid of for Vincent, although generally how Vincent's built, right? From my understanding, there's generally better things to hit, right? So nonetheless, it is a nice play piece to have back. Again, just synergizing with Soul Shackle and most likely working with what's to come with Usurp the Shadow Throne. Now, Steel Blade Shunt. So this is a really, really good defensive option for Warrior, right? A class that kind of lacks a lot of good defensive options. So a 1 for 6 D-React, right? That also then has a pretty good effect. So if it specifically defends a weapon attack, it deals 1 damage to that attacking hero. Now, as a nice big D-React, it obviously works really well with the Decimator Great Axe plan of, well, fatiguing, right? So good amount of block to then just continue to swing down your opponent. But I think something that is kind of overlooked is the lack of defensive options within Warrior. So if you look at class constructed decks, they rely on the good old generic defense reactions as their defensive toolkit pieces. We did see Flurryfoot dance, but that is sort of dependent on the style of warrior playing, right? And while the payoff for Flurryfoot dance is a reasonable value, it is still an objective, right, that you have to work into your deck. Obviously, it doesn't work without a sword, as that is how Flurry currently works, rather the interactions that generate Flurry. But up and coming with Mastery Pack Warrior, we do have Golden Company and Steel, and I suspect that there may be a few more defense reactions or defensive toolkit pieces, probably blocks, that will be opened up to Warrior, because they are sort of lagging behind if you look at their respective card pools compared to everyone else. So as much as Steelblade Shunt will feed a Decimated Great Axe, I think overall it is a good choice for Warrior in general. And lastly, we have Vigorous Smash Up returning. So Vigor is just fantastic in Brute, right? As the class I've played probably most, yeah, Vigor goes a long way. Now, nice easy example is its ability to, create a really powerful small hand turn. So even if you just have a blue, and in this case a Wild Ride and a weapon on board, you can then do a reasonable amounts of push, right? You've blocked with Vigorous, you've blocked with probably another card, and that is a really good turn. But just in general, right, with the fact that you are building around 6s, you don't really have that concrete resource base like some other decks, because again, you're building around 6s. Vigor helps fix a lot of things. It rewards you for taking big cards rather than, again, just safety blues. So yeah, it was obviously really egregious when it came to KO, his ease of winning clashes, his ability to take it in its entire color scheme, but nonetheless, Vigor is really good for Brute in general and works into their game plan overall, right? Again, fixes a yellow, fixes a red in some cases, and still lets you do something at least decent. So, yeah, great defensive option to see returned to Brute while KO is benched. We'll be curious to see if it goes once KO does return, but nonetheless, there we go. So again, these don't come into effect until July 6th, but these are definitely some nice changes for both Classic Constructed and Silver Age. Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.